What if the kindest thing you ever did changed your life forever? Helen Garrett had wiped down the same vinyl booth 3 times that Tuesday afternoon, her hands red and rough from years of dish soap and long shifts. The diner smelled like coffee and yesterday's meatloaf. She was 58 years old, wore shoes with holes she'd patched with cardboard, and hadn't been on a date since her husband died 6 years ago. That's when she saw him, a man in a wheelchair by the window, staring at the rain with such loneliness it made her chest ache. Something about the way he held his coffee cup, like he was trying to warm more than just his hands, made her walk over. She didn't know his name. Didn't know about the black sedans waiting outside or the men who watched his every move. She only knew he looked like he needed someone to see him. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Helen had worked at Rosie's Diner for 14 years, ever since Tom passed and the medical bills had swallowed their savings like a hungry beast. The place wasn't much. Checkered floors worn thin in spots, vinyl seats patched with duct tape, and a ceiling fan that squeaked with every rotation. But it was hers in a way. She knew every regular's order by heart, remembered their birthdays, asked about their grandchildren. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd built from the pieces left behind. The lunch rush had died down when he wheeled himself in. Helen noticed him right away because strangers were rare in their small corner of Newark. He looked to be in his early 60s, with silver threading through dark hair and a face that seemed carved from something harder than flesh. His suit was expensive. She could tell by the way it fit, even sitting down. But it was his eyes that caught her. They held something she recognized, something she'd seen in her own mirror on the worst mornings. Grief, maybe, or the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She'd approached his table with her notepad and her practiced smile. "What can I get you, hon?" He'd looked up, and for just a second, she saw surprise flicker across his face, like he wasn't used to being called hon by anyone. "Just coffee, black." His voice was rough like gravel under tires. She'd poured his cup, noticed his hands. They were scarred, one knuckle bent at an odd angle that spoke of old breaks that hadn't healed right. Working hands, despite the fancy suit. That intrigued her. Over the next hour, she found herself glancing his way more than she meant to. He never touched his phone, never opened a laptop. Just sat there watching the rain streak the windows, his coffee growing cold. Something about that stillness tugged at her. She knew what it looked like when someone was alone but didn't want to be. Her coworker Jenny, a girl young enough to be her granddaughter, nudged her while they folded napkins. "That guy's been here forever. Think he's waiting for someone?" Helen shook her head. "I don't think so." "He keeps looking at you," Jenny whispered, grinning. Helen felt heat creep up her neck. "Don't be silly. He's just—" But she stopped because Jenny wasn't wrong. Every time she glanced over, his eyes would dart away, like a boy caught staring in church. The afternoon dragged on. Helen's feet ached in that deep, bone-tired way they did after standing for hours. She thought about Tom, about how he used to rub her feet on their couch while they watched the evening news. About how she'd give anything to have that again. Not the romance of movies, but the simple comfort of not being alone. When her shift ended at 4, she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She walked to his table with her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm Helen," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up at her, and she saw that surprise again. "Vincent! Vincent!" She rolled the name around in her mouth. "I hope this doesn't sound crazy, but would you maybe want to get dinner sometime? Somewhere that's not here?" She laughed nervously. "I know every item on this menu by heart, and I can promise you there are better places in town." The silence stretched so long she wanted to disappear into the cracked linoleum. Then something softened in his face. Something that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. "Why?" he asked, and there was genuine confusion in the question. Helen thought about lying, about making up something charming or clever. But she'd learned long ago that life was too short for anything but truth. "Because you look like you could use a friend. And honestly, so could I." She saw his throat work as he swallowed. Saw something like pain cross his face before he nodded, just once. "Friday night?" "Friday night," she agreed. writing her number on her order pad with shaking hands. She didn't see the black Mercedes parked across the street, or the two men inside who tensed when she approached Vincent's table. Didn't notice how the diner had slowly cleared of other customers, or how the couple by the door hadn't touched their food in an hour. Didn't know that Vincent Caruso hadn't been asked on a date in 10 years, not since the accident that left him in the wheelchair, not since most people started looking through him instead of at him. As Helen walked home through the October drizzle, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. It flickered in her chest like a candle flame, small and fragile but undeniably there. She wondered what she'd wear, if her good dress still fit, if she remembered how to do this at all. She didn't wonder about Vincent, about what kind of man sat alone in diners on Tuesday afternoons, about what stories lived in those scarred hands. She would learn soon enough. Friday came faster than Helen expected. She'd spent the week in a fog of nervousness and excitement that made her feel foolish and giddy in equal measure. Jenny had helped her pick out an outfit, a simple navy dress that Helen had worn to her nephew's wedding 2 years ago. It still fit, though it pulled a bit tight around the middle. She'd never been thin, and Tom had always said he loved her that way, loved that there was more of her to hold. Vincent picked her up at 7 in a car that made her neighbor's curtains twitch. It was sleek and black, driven by a silent man in a dark suit who opened doors and called Vincent Sir, in a way that made Helen's stomach flutter with something that might have been warning. But Vincent smiled when he saw her, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and she forgot to be nervous. The restaurant was Italian, tucked into a neighborhood she didn't know. The owner greeted Vincent by name, led them to a quiet corner table without asking where they wanted to sit. Helen noticed how people looked at them, at Vincent, really. Some with recognition, others with something that looked like fear. But Vincent's attention stayed on her, asking about her life with a genuine interest that made her feel, for the first time in years, like she mattered. She told him about Tom, about the hardware store they'd run together until cancer took him piece by piece, about their daughter Sarah, who lived in California with a family of her own and called every Sunday without fail, about how she'd learned to be alone but never quite got used to it. "You don't seem alone," Vincent said quietly. "You seem like someone who knows how to fill her own space." Something in the way he said it made her eyes sting. "Is that your way of saying I talk too much?" "It's my way of saying I envy you." He looked down at his wine glass, turning it slowly between those scarred fingers. "I've been surrounded by people my whole life, Helen, but I can't remember the last time I wasn't lonely." The weight of that confession hung between them. She reached across the table without thinking, covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, the scars rough under her palm. "Tell me," and he did. Not everything. She'd learn later that he'd left out the important parts, the dangerous parts. But he told her about the accident 5 years ago. A car bomb meant for him that killed his driver and left Vincent's spine shattered. About how the wheelchair had changed everything, made him feel invisible in a way that had nothing to do with respect, and everything to do with being seen as less than whole. About his wife, who'd left him 8 months after the accident, unable to handle what their life had become. "People don't look at me the same way anymore," he said, and there was such rawness in his voice that Helen wanted to gather him up like she would a hurt child. "Except you. You looked right at me, like I was just a man." "Because that's what you are," she said simply. "Just a man having coffee." The food came and went. They talked about music and old movies, about the Newark they'd both grown up in when it was still more neighborhood than city. He made her laugh, really laugh, until her sides hurt and tears streamed down her face. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. They were sharing tiramisu, him insisting she try it, her protesting she'd had enough, both of them smiling like teenagers when she saw it. The way the owner kept glancing at their table, the way a man at the bar stood up too quickly when someone entered the restaurant, his hand moving to his hip in a gesture that made Helen's blood run cold. She'd grown up in Newark. She knew what that gesture meant. "If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." "Vincent." she said slowly, setting down her fork. What kind of business are you in? She watched him freeze, watched the careful mask slide over his face. Why do you ask? Because that man at the bar has a gun. Because the owner looks at you like you're either going to save him or ruin him. Because... She stopped, her heart hammering. Because I'm not stupid, and I need you to tell me the truth. The silence stretched like taffy pulled too thin. Vincent's jaw worked, and she could see him weighing his options, deciding how much truth she could handle. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. My family. We're an import-export. But not the kind you're thinking of. We handle problems for people who can't go to the police. We protect neighborhoods, settle disputes. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. We're what people call the mob, Helen. I run one of the largest families in New Jersey. The world tilted sideways. Helen gripped the table's edge, her mind racing through every movie she'd ever seen, every news story about violence and crime. But when she looked at Vincent, really looked at him, she saw the same man who'd asked her why with such genuine confusion. The same man who'd smiled at her stories about Tom and listened like every word mattered. Have you killed people? She asked, her voice shaking. Yes. No hesitation, no excuse. Are you going to kill me for knowing? Something broke in his expression. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, standing on legs that felt like water. Every eye in the restaurant turned to them. The man at the bar tensed. Helen, please. I need to think, she whispered. I have to go. She walked out into the cool October night, her heart breaking and racing all at once. Behind her, she heard Vincent call her name, heard the scrape of his wheelchair on the floor. But she kept walking, tears streaming down her face, wondering how she could have been so foolish, so blind. What she didn't see was Vincent's face as he watched her go. Didn't see the way he pressed his palm against his chest, like he could physically hold together something that was shattering inside him. Didn't see the fear in his eyes. Not for his safety, but for losing the first real thing he'd had in years. Helen didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a horse if you squinted right, and tried to make sense of the impossible. Vincent Caruso was a mobster, a criminal, the kind of man her mother would have crossed the street to avoid. And yet, when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the way he'd looked at her, like she was something precious, like she mattered. Her phone had rung 17 times. She'd let every call go to voicemail, unable to face his voice, unable to trust what she might say if she answered. By Saturday morning, her mailbox was full of messages she couldn't bring herself to delete or listen to. Jenny came by around noon with coffee and bagels, her young face creased with worry. You look terrible, Helen. Thanks, Helen said dryly, letting her in. I heard things. Jenny set the coffee on Helen's worn kitchen table. People talk, you know, about Vincent Caruso, about what he is. Helen's hands shook as she opened her coffee. And what is he, Jenny? Dangerous, powerful, but also... Jenny hesitated. My grandmother lives in the old neighborhood. She says the Caruso family, they take care of people. When her landlord tried to evict everyone to sell the building, Vincent stopped it. When the bodega got robbed 3 times in a month, his people made it stop. It's not simple, Helen. Nothing in this city is simple. Helen thought about that, about how she'd judged Vincent in one breath for what he was, while living in a neighborhood his protection likely touched. About how many times she'd been grateful when the streets felt safer after dark, never asking why. Hypocrisy tasted bitter on her tongue. I don't know what to do, she admitted. Jenny squeezed her hand. Do you trust him? Not what he does, him. The man who asked you to dinner. That was the question, wasn't it? Helen remembered Vincent's face when he'd told her the truth. He could have lied. Could have let her walk away thinking he was just a wealthy businessman. But he'd chosen honesty, even knowing it might cost him everything. On Sunday, Helen went to church for the first time in months. She sat in the back pew, listening to Father McKinney talk about grace and forgiveness, about how love meant seeing the whole person, not just the easy parts. After the service, she stood outside in the autumn sunshine, watching families laugh and children chase each other around the parking lot. Her phone buzzed, Not a call this time, but a text. She almost didn't look, but something made her pull it out. I understand if you never want to see me again, but please know that those 3 hours with you were the happiest I've been in 5 years. You made me feel like myself again, like I was worth something beyond fear and respect. Thank you for that gift, Vincent. Helen read it 3 times, her eyes blurring with tears. She thought about Tom, about how he'd always said that people were more than their worst choices, about how he'd worked with addicts at the hardware store, giving them jobs when no one else would, believing in second chances even when it cost them money. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. That afternoon, she did something that scared her more than walking away had. She called Vincent back. He answered on the first ring. Helen. Just her name, but she could hear everything in it. Hope, fear, relief. I'm not saying yes to anything, she said quickly. But I'm not saying no either. I need to understand, Vincent. I need to know who you really are. Okay, he said softly. Okay. Can I see you? They met at a park near the river, neutral ground where they could see each other coming. Vincent wheeled himself to the bench where she sat, and for a long moment, they just looked at each other. He had dark circles under his eyes, his face drawn in a way that made her heart ache. My father started the business, he began. I grew up in it. By the time I was old enough to understand what it really meant, it was all I knew. I've done things I'm not proud of, Helen. Things that keep me awake at night. But I've also protected people, kept families in their homes, made sure kids could walk to school safely. It's not black and white. Are you still... She couldn't finish the question. Killing people? He said it for her, unflinching. Not since the accident. I've been trying to transition the family into legitimate businesses. It's slow, and it's dangerous, because there are people who don't want things to change. But I'm trying. I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to build something different. Helen watched a mother push her child on the swings, their laughter carrying on the October breeze. She thought about judgment and mercy, about second chances, and the courage it took to change. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of what being with you might mean. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of caring about someone again only to lose them. Vincent reached for her hand, and this time, she let him take it. I'm scared too. But Helen, for the first time in 5 years, I have something worth being scared about losing. That's more than I had before you walked up to my table. Over the next 2 months, Helen learned what it meant to love someone who lived in the shadows. Vincent was careful with her, never bringing his work into her world, never putting her in danger, but she learned to read the tension in his shoulders when his phone rang with certain numbers. Learned that some nights he couldn't sleep because of memories that haunted him. Learned that the man in the wheelchair, the one so many people feared, had the gentlest hands and the saddest smile when he thought no one was watching. He took her to places she'd never imagined. A private box at the opera where she cried during La Bohème, her hand in his. A small Italian restaurant in Queens where his grandmother's recipes were still on the menu, and the owner kissed both her cheeks like she was family. His penthouse apartment with its view of the city, where he cooked her dinner with his own scarred hands and told her stories about growing up in the old neighborhood, before the violence and the power. I wanted to be a teacher, he told her one night, wine-soft and vulnerable. Can you imagine Vincent Caruso with a classroom full of kids? I can, Helen said, and meant it. She'd seen how he was with Jenny's little sister when she'd stopped by the diner, patient and kind, treating the shy 6-year-old like her observations. About clouds were the most important things in the world, but happiness, Helen learned, was a dangerous thing in Vincent's world. She started noticing the same black car following her home from work. Vincent's men, he assured her, just keeping her safe. But safe from what? He wouldn't say, and that silence grew between them like a wall. It came to a head on a Tuesday evening in December. Helen was closing the diner when 3 men walked in. Young, hungry-looking, with eyes that made her think of stray dogs she'd seen once, feral and desperate. The diner was empty except for her and old Pete washing dishes in the back. "You're Helen," the tallest one said. Not a question. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "We're closed. We know who you are to Caruso." He moved closer, and Helen saw the gun tucked into his waistband. "You're going to come with us. Nice and quiet. You do that, nobody gets hurt." Helen's mind raced. She thought about Tom, about Sarah waiting for her Sunday call, about Vincent's face when he smiled at her, about how much life she still wanted to live. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The young man looked genuinely surprised. "Lady, you don't understand. I understand perfectly." Helen picked up her purse, her hand finding the pepper spray Jenny had insisted she carry. "I'm a 58-year-old waitress with arthritis and a mortgage. I don't know what you think taking me will accomplish, but I promise you it's not worth what will happen next." "Vincent Caruso doesn't scare me," the boy said, but his voice wavered. "Then you're a fool," came a voice from the doorway. Helen's knees nearly gave out with relief. Vincent wheeled in, flanked by 2 men who made the boys with guns look like children playing dress-up. But it was Vincent who held the room. Not with violence, but with the quiet certainty of someone who'd fought harder battles and won. "Leave," Vincent said simply. "Now, before I forget I'm trying to be a better man." The boys ran. Actually ran, stumbling over each other to get out the door. Helen stood there shaking, her pepper spray still clutched in her fist, and started laughing. It was the kind of laughter that comes when fear drains away and leaves you hollow and giddy all at once. Vincent wheeled to her, his hands framing her face. "Are you hurt?" "No. No, Vincent, I told them no. They had a gun, and I told them no." She was still laughing, crying a little too. "I don't know what came over me." "You came over you," he said, and there was something like awe in his voice. "You, Helen Garrett, who walks up to strange men in diners and asks them to dinner, who refuses to be scared even when she should be, who made a man like me remember what it feels like to hope. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales." He kissed her then, right there in the empty diner with its checkered floors and squeaky ceiling fan. Kissed her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. And Helen, who hadn't been kissed in 7 years, kissed him back with everything she had. Later, in his apartment with its city view, Vincent told her everything. About the threats from a rival family trying to take his territory. About how they'd seen her with him and decided she was a vulnerability. About how his men had stopped 6 attempts to get to her before tonight's. "I can't do this to you," he said, and she heard his heart breaking in those words. "I can't put you in this danger." Helen took his face in her hands, these hands that had wiped tables and held her dying husband, and worked every day of her life for something better. "Vincent Caruso, you listen to me. I'm not some young girl who needs protecting. I've buried a husband, raised a daughter, and survived things that would break softer people. If you want me gone, say so. But don't you dare make that choice for me. I want you here," he whispered. "God help me. I want you here forever." "Then that's settled," Helen said, and meant it with every part of her soul. Spring came to Newark like a promise kept. The city shed its winter gray and bloomed in ways that made Helen remember being young when every season felt like a new beginning. She'd moved into Vincent's penthouse 3 months ago, not because he'd asked, but because her lease was up, and staying seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Her daughter had flown in from California to meet him, skeptical and protective, until Vincent had asked about her children with genuine interest, and taught her 8-year-old son a card trick that made him squeal with delight. Sarah had pulled Helen aside later and said, "He's good for you, Mom. You look happy again." And she was happy. Happier than she'd been in years, maybe ever. Not because Vincent was wealthy or powerful, but because he was kind. Because he made her coffee every morning exactly the way she liked it. Too much cream, 2 sugars. Because he listened when she talked about her day and remembered the small details. Because he was trying, every single day, to be better than he'd been. The transition out of the old business was slow and dangerous, just as Vincent had warned. There were meetings with lawyers and accountants, with old friends who felt betrayed and enemies who sensed weakness. But Vincent held firm, dismantling the criminal empire his father had built and constructing something cleaner in its place. Legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, real estate, things that wouldn't keep Helen awake at night, wondering if this would be the day he didn't come home. One warm May evening, Vincent took Helen back to Rosie's diner. They hadn't been there since that first Tuesday when she'd walked up to his table with nothing but kindness and courage. The place looked exactly the same. Checkered floors, squeaky fan, the smell of coffee and pie. Jenny shrieked when she saw them, hugging Helen so hard it hurt in the best way. "I knew it," Jenny said, grinning. "I knew you two were meant for something special." They sat in the same booth by the window where Vincent had spent that afternoon alone, watching the rain. But this time, Helen sat beside him instead of across from him, their hands intertwined on the worn vinyl seat. The spring sunshine poured through the window, warm and golden, making everything look softer. "Kinder, I've been thinking," Vincent said, his voice carrying that nervous edge she'd learned meant something important was coming. "About that conversation we had, about me wanting to be a teacher." Helen squeezed his hand. "I remember. I've been talking to the community center in my old neighborhood. They need someone to teach a job skills class. Resume writing, interviewing, that kind of thing. For people trying to get back on their feet after prison." He looked at her, and she saw both hope and fear in his eyes. "I know I'm not exactly a role model, but maybe you're exactly what they need," Helen interrupted. "Someone who understands what it's like to try to change your path. Someone who knows it's possible." The smile that spread across his face made him look years younger. "You think so?" "I know so." They ordered pie, apple for her, cherry for him, and talked about the future in a way neither of them had dared to before. About the teaching program Vincent wanted to start. About Helen maybe cutting back her hours at the diner, taking some time to figure out what she wanted, now that she wasn't just surviving, but living. About maybe taking a trip. Vincent had never been to California, and Sarah had been asking when they'd visit. "I never thought I'd have this," Vincent said quietly. "Watching the spring rain start to fall outside the window, I thought that accident took everything from me. My legs, my future, any chance at a normal life. But it brought me here, to this diner, on that Tuesday, when you walked up and saw me instead of looking through me." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "I saw a man who looked lonely. I saw someone who needed a friend." "You saw more than that," Vincent said. "You saw who I could be, who I wanted to be, and you loved that person even when I didn't believe he existed." She turned to face him fully. This man who'd been a stranger 9 months ago and was now the center of her world. "Vincent Caruso, you were always that person. You just forgot for a while. All I did was remind you." "No," he said, his scarred hand cupping her cheek. "You didn't remind me. You showed me there's a difference." They sat there as the spring rain pattered against the window, as the diner filled with the evening crowd, as life went on around them in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Helen thought about the journey that had brought her here. Through love and loss, through loneliness and fear, through one moment of courage in asking a stranger to dinner. She thought about Tom and how he would have liked Vincent, would have appreciated his dry humor and his honest efforts to change. She thought about Sarah and her grandchildren she was finally going to visit. She thought about all the years she'd spent just getting by and how it felt to finally live again. "I love you," she said, because life was too short for anything but truth, and she'd learned that lesson well. "I love you too," Vincent replied, and there was wonder in his voice. like he couldn't quite believe he got to say those words and mean them. Outside, the rain turned to sunshine again, the way it does in spring when the world can't decide between sorrow and joy and chooses both. Inside Rosie's diner, with its squeaky fan and checkered floors, two people who'd been lost found each other and held on tight. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts below, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this one. Thank you for taking this journey with Helen and Vincent. May you find your own moments of courage, your own second chances, and your own unexpected love. Until next time, take care of each other out there.